Well, hello everyone. My name is Svetlana Kasalovic, and I teach multimedia and graphic design here at Moorpark College.
And my name is Tim Samoff, and I teach in the multimedia program.
So, title of this opening faculty lecture for the Year of Self and Society is Open Source, Utopia, and Enterprise. If you're new to this topic, or even if you're not new to this topic, I'm going to start by either introducing you or refreshing your memory about one of the open source and free software manifestos created by Richard Matthew Stallman, also known as RMS. And I'm going to talk about his speech where he outlined the 4 freedoms that this movement is all about. So he is a computer scientist, and he is a software activist for life. That's how he likes to refer to himself. He was educated at MIT, and he created this organization called Free Software Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that is devoted to promotion of creation, modification, and distribution of software that is free. So in the essence of this movement is a quest for 4 freedoms. And in Stallman's manifesto, freedom number 1 is freedom to run software any way you wish. I'm going to give you a little cooking analogy because that's what he likes to do. So if you, let's say, watch a cooking show on TV and you see Giada De Laurentiis' pasta recipe that you like, you're free to write it down and you're free to cook it anytime and anywhere you want. Second freedom is freedom to help yourself. So in software terminology, it means studying the source code and changing it to do whatever you wish. In cooking analogy, that means modifying a recipe to your liking. So for example, if you don't use white sugar and Emeril Lagasse's recipes are too sweet for you because there's no dish where he doesn't add incredible amounts of sugar, then you might want to change ingredients and use either agave nectar or stevia instead, and you have a total freedom to do that. Freedom number 2 is freedom to help your neighbor. Freedom to copy the program and distribute to others as you wish. So in cooking example, that would be when you write down Giada's spaghetti recipe, you're free to hand it to anyone you like. And freedom number 4, is to help your community to publish and distribute a modified version whenever you wish. So that would be, remember your modified recipe where you swap ingredients with each other, eliminate, add some more, and freely distribute it to your whole community, to anyone you want. So why is this important? Why are these 4 freedoms important? Well, the way he puts it is that if you're just handed free software, let's say our school gets free license from Adobe, are you really going to learn how to understand and respect what that means? Is proprietary software actually a true part of development? Well, according to Stallman, it is not. He thinks that only open source software leads to development. So he thinks that open source proponents are not only supposed to develop free software, distribute it, teach people how to use it, encourage people to try it, switch to it, but we need to remind people of the 4 freedoms all the time. And we need to make sure that everyone knows how to live in freedom and be a good neighbor. So he thinks that companies like Adobe that promote proprietary software are actually engaged in electronic colonization, and that proprietary software is not sustainable, and it creates technology of dependence. Is this take utopian or not? That's on us to try to figure out as we discuss this topic together. We're starting from utopian point of view, and if we define utopia as an ideal community possessing a desirable perfection, And if you're familiar with utopian manifestos from early 20th century, like futurist, modernist, surrealist, you may link Stallman's manifesto to this line of thinking, where theory has a single goal to broaden our views, have us question everything, and seek improvement of conditions. For example, he compares companies, proprietary software companies like Adobe, to colonial powers of the past, where colonial power is in charge of all the industry and technology. And if you're living in a colony and part of the life in the colony, you can only buy industry and technology. You can't look into it. You're not even supposed to modify it or fix it on yourself. If something breaks, you have to send it back to your colonizer, and they will take care of it. So you may see this as a pretty radical approach, but he's, by his own decision, a lifetime activist for free software.
And going off of what Richard Stallman did for the not only the software industry, but for the open source philosophy in general, there are a number of other people who actually have become and are inspired by his work. Now, Richard Stallman is an advocate and an idealist, and he will die that way. He will never use proprietary software or proprietary practices within his personal life. We can either choose to embrace that and wholeheartedly live that way ourselves, or choose to pick parts of it that we can actually, use within, what's useful in our lives. So it's sort of up to us to the extent of how we embrace that utopia, or we deny that utopia, or if we even think it's a utopia. Now, regardless of how much you may or may not use open source software in your life, or at least you think you use open source software in your life, I'd like to bring up 3 people who actually contributed something to our lives that we probably use every day. The first person is Timothy Berners-Lee. I don't know if anyone here knows who that is, but he's actually the, I guess you could say, creator of the World Wide Web. And there should be a picture up, hopefully. There he is. Timothy Berners-Lee in 1989 was a computer scientist who all of a sudden had this idea. How can we link pieces of information to each other, maybe even add some images and some interactivity, and make it available to the entirety of the world? Now, at this time in 1989, he could have kept this secret to himself and developed a proprietary product that allowed people to navigate information, find pieces of tidbits of things that they wanted to learn across the internet. Now, at this time, the internet had been around for a while. We just didn't have the interface that was the World Wide Web. In 1989, he made a drastic decision. He decided to make it open and free for everyone to use. And because of that, we actually use open source software in all of our lives, even if it's through a proprietary piece of software, like on your iPhone if you use Safari, or in Windows if you use Internet Explorer. Those are all proprietary pieces of software that access open source, other open source pieces of software. Now, another person is named Linus Torvalds. And Linus Torvalds was another computer programmer that in 1991 began developing something called Linux. Now, some of you may have heard of Linux. It's a operating system that sort of rivals Macintosh and Windows and some other operating systems. But that he actually made available as an open source piece of software as well. Now, Linus should be up here. Linus is an interesting fellow in that he developed this software and made it available to others and actually continues to contribute to the software. But here's an interesting fact. At this day and age, when Linux is actually a fairly mature piece of software, there's thousands, maybe even millions of people contributing to the source code. He now possesses less than 2% of the source code that's involved with Linux. And so as someone who created this operating system and made it available to others, he barely has a little footprint in this thing now. Yet they still call him, and this is kind of funny, the benevolent dictator of Linux. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if anything comes into Linux that he doesn't approve of or like, he can say, forget about it. I don't like it. And it'll actually be removed from the source code. Yet He holds a very small portion of that source code, and it's still considered his, which is really interesting. Now, going back to the World Wide Web, you may not know this, but most of the services that are available on the World Wide Web run on top of Linux. Web servers, different protocols that we use, these are all pieces of this Linux environment. You can run web servers on proprietary software, but for the most part, the White House, Google, Yahoo, these all run on open source components. And so whether or not you think you use open source, well, this is a big part of it. Now, the last person I want to bring up is Eric S. Raymond. He wrote a book called, he's writing a book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, and it has a subtitle, Musings on Linux and Open Source by an Accidental Revolutionary. He began the book in 1997 and continues to write it to this day. And he's one of the people who actually spearheaded one of the main philosophies of open source software, and that is release often, release early. Meaning, if you have software, put it out there to people and let it go. If you have a change to it, make that happen as well. Now, the next picture will show this doesn't work in every indication or instance. Okay, so there's his release early, release often. Go to the next slide, please. There you go. So it doesn't always work. This is a funny joke that was sort of created by computer geeks as he talked about his wife and said, release early, release often, and well, you know, as you can see, she's pregnant and that doesn't always work. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about as far as Eric S. Raymond is concerned. In his book, Cathedral and the Bazaar, he says, the Linux community seems to resemble a great babbling bazaar of differing agendas and approaches, out of which a coherent, stable system should seemingly emerge only by a succession of miracles. And so basically he saw this group of disparate people from all over the world creating something that actually ended up working, and that's another benefit of the ideal of open source. When I speak again, I'll talk about maybe some other things about open source that you didn't know about. But at this point, let's maybe shift back to you, Svetlana.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about one example of software and community that in many ways exemplifies Stallman's four freedoms. I guess you all got this handout that I printed for you. I'm not sure if anyone saw a Scratch application before or eventually used it, because it's being used between kindergarten level and grad school level all over the world. So I'm using it in some of my classes to build, have students build games, or just for rapid prototyping of some concepts such as frame-by-frame animation. It's much quicker than using Flash to do it, for example, by promoting some of the abstract concepts, such as black square exercise, where you learn how to communicate different abstract concepts using 4 squares, for example. Also, concept of abstraction, where students start with a photograph and then turn it into an outline as abstract as possible in increments, and then animate the whole process in Scratch. But let me tell you first something about, what Scratch is. I guess you all assume, why is it named Scratch? Have you heard this term before? Hip-hop disc jockeys, right? It's based on the same principle as hip-hop disc jockeys mix creatively and freely different parts of digital music. That's the same thing that happens with Scratch users. They use all different kinds of media, and they mix them together and combine them in this software application. So this application, Scratch is actually a programming language. You will see first and second column in the handout that I gave you that actually lists some of the code that you can implement in the same way you would implement, you would link Legos together. So you just start experimenting with different bits and pieces of code, and very soon you get an interactive story, animation, game, music, or art, and then you upload it, and then you share it with others. So Scratch was developed by this organization called the Lifelong Kindergarten Group at MIT Media Lab. And it was supported financially by National Science Foundation, among others, MacArthur Foundation, Google, and MIT Media Lab Research Consortia. Scratch not only is very quick to use and bring results that you desire, but it also introduces some high-end computational and mathematical concepts, and it's really very well fitted to teach the entire science curriculum at the basic level. Actually, it's Brian Foley who is running Scratch LA group from CSUN, our #1 transfer school, who is running this Scratch LA organization, and he wrote science curriculum using Scratch from, for Northridge, California State University, Northridge. So I'm going to talk about a few things. In addition to this, Scratch is not just a computer application, it is also a community. Many of the behaviors that wouldn't be suitable under the copyright law, such as taking someone else's code, tweaking it, and remixing it, is not only acceptable with Scratch, it's embraced and it's very much encouraged with Scratch. So students can have their friends help them build their animations, help them, let's say, record their friends' voices and create an animation and just get engaged in self-expression. And according to this whole initiative for connected learning, Scratch is a perfect example of an application that is used for connected learning. One of the hypotheses in the context of connected learning is that students learn best in the intersection of their interests, academics, and peer culture. And these three things very rarely get together and come together. Students are very often left to make connections between all these things all by themselves. So learning Scratch helps them link the three together, and their peer social world gets together with their academic interests and with their interests in general. And that's the benefit of these three spheres, that they enable learning. Also, connected learning allows for creating many more entry points to learning and many more pathways to success. So let me just tell you real quickly how things usually work with Scratch. You start learning in the way that's referred to look over, friend told me. So you're sneaking behind someone's back and looking what they're doing, and then you make some links and connections. Then, if you're interested, then you start tinkering. And Scratch community is very big on encouraging tinkering. So they want you to do something that's unusual in academic environment, to mess up with applications, to kind of try to build things on your own. And if you find it to be cool, then you may start, this is the term I learned when I was at MIT at the Scratch conference this summer, geeking out. I don't know, I wasn't familiar with that term, but geeking out actually means that you get closer to academics. You actually start exploring tutorials and methods of doing things, and you start participating in digital media, and you start moving along with it. Scratch community supports not only tinkering, but supports, remix. So if you create something and publish it online immediately, anyone can open your project. They can copy your code, they can improve it, or do something better or worse or different in any way. And then usually people engage in this discussion and talk about how did they use code, how did they implement things, and usually come up with variations or remix versions of the project and end up with something unexpected, right? Through this community work and supporting each other. Another thing that I was very, very impressed with is that Scratch is used all over the world. MIT Scratch conference was called Build Your Own World, and it takes place at MIT Media Lab every summer in July, at the end of July. And people from all over the world come to share their experiences. And I think this totally exemplifies freedoms number 2 and number 3, which in our case is society. So I witnessed so many interesting presentations. One of them coming from Israel, where a core Israeli team is actually engaged in collaboration on Scratch projects with people from Syria, Palestine, and Jordan. So Scratch actually helped, bridge all the political tensions in the region and help students from kindergarten level to graduate school level get together and build these projects together. Another very interesting example I saw was from Hong Kong. It was primarily an after-school project, but actually they had a list of all different kinds of venues that they work with. Youth centers, creative programs in housing estates, then after-school programs, creative learning and curriculum, hands-on based activities. So they have a total of 473 schools in Hong Kong that embrace Scratch and use it at very different levels: kindergarten, elementary schools, middle high school, special schools, and tertiary institutions. I also watched presentations from Uruguay, from Ireland, from Moorpark College, because I had one of the presentations there. And it was very, very impressive how Scratch not only gets people engaged, helps them develop their interests, and not moves them only forward to another level, but helps them go broader and embrace other things into their learning. Students at the younger age and level very often ask, so what's next? Scratch is simple, easy, as much as concepts introduced with Scratch are really top-level programming concepts, but students still feel that tinkering is not something that will be encouraged as they go older, as much as it is at this level. So they ask, what's next? So there were many examples where I heard that kids get into Scratch just because it's so easy to draw and to get things moving around, to record your own sound and make them part of the project that you are creating. But then some students come to it because they like fashion. I saw students who really liked drawing different patterns for clothing or different accessories for clothing, and that brought them in. Then as they moved along, they switched to game design. And then it turned out that by building games in Scratch, they actually figured out that they like drama. And they moved from games that they created in Scratch to, studying drama or being engaged in drama. And then eventually going to other higher level programming environments and doing something else. So as promoters of connected learning put it, we need multiple entry points and multiple exit career paths. And that's what Scratch is great for. You get in by watching over your buddy's shoulder. You start tinkering. You develop interest. You start geeking out. And after you produced some of the work, you move somewhere else. And that move doesn't mean that you left Scratch totally. You're just broadening your way of thinking and moving along. So I will just tell you real briefly types of projects that I used Scratch for. If you're willing to check it out, we have Scratch installed in all the labs in this building, COM 150, 151, and 109. And we have lab open hours from 3:30 to 6 daily. So feel free to stop by, check it out, and if you end up liking it, please email me. I would love to help you open a Scratch users group here at Moorpark College if you're interested. Project that we worked on last semester here at Moorpark College in my Design and Society class was an attempt to build an empathy game where students create a learning space, which is our two rooms, COM 150 and 151 layout. And then they create characters and they try to experience that space from the point of view of different learning style. So if you're a visual learner, you put yourself into the shoes of a kinesthetic learner or cognitive learner, and you experience lecturing, videos, or other learning, teaching activities from their point of view. It was a rather ambitious plan since Scratch was only installed to that room mid-semester, last semester, but we're going to repeat that this semester in the classes. And like I said, it's much easier to use it for quick projects, rapid prototyping, just to introduce concepts that would otherwise require major training in technology. When I think about frame-by-frame animation that could be done with Scratch in no time, half hour, you really need to learn. How much do you think you need to study Flash to be able to do frame-by-frame animation?
In code?
Yeah.
Oh, a year at least.
A year? Yeah. So it's helpful and it's encouraging. And to wrap it up, we need to bridge learning from kindergarten to grad level. It's very hard to bridge when there's nothing to bridge it to, but we're very lucky that our transfer program at CSUN has Scratch community, Scratch LA, so we can kind of build bridge toward that community and be part of Stallman's quest for 4 freedoms.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely. So that's actually a great application that sort of leads into what I'm going to talk about today, which is not only the idea of working in software, but the fact that open source as a philosophy bridges many different areas within our lives. For instance, prompted by Stallman and some of these concepts of remixing and taking what people have done previously and making it available for others, there's another guy I'd like to introduce named Lawrence Lessig. He's actually a lawyer through Harvard, and he created something many years ago, some of you may have heard of it, called the Creative Commons. And the Creative Commons is basically a grassroots-oriented system that allows people to protect and not copyright, because this isn't like US copyright, but actually apply something called a copyleft license to their work. This can be art, this could be music, this could be literature. And what it does is it allows you to attribute the fact that you're the creator of this artwork, but then it also allows you to, if you so choose, make that work available to others. And so open source doesn't just have to deal with software. It can deal with painting, it can deal with photographs, it can deal with anything that you make what's called the source of that work available to others. So for instance, if I did something in Photoshop that was really cool, I could actually upload that Photoshop file online with all of the layers and all of the various things that I put into it, available for others to kind of play with and see what I did and learn from it, or take it and remix it for their own purposes. And so open source is software, and it's also, well, the law. And the fact that we are all, as humans, what might be considered the commons. And the idea of the commons is that everything that we do is for the betterment of all of us, right? And so we should never make anything, at least as far as the open source philosophy is concerned, never make anything closed or proprietary, because automatically you're cutting people off from you. So the idea of open source is not just some sort of wishy-washy geeky thing. It's actually a life philosophy that hopefully will better mankind. There's also many companies that deal with open source business practices. For instance, have you ever thought about starting a company in which all of your salaries and your practices and your meetings and everything you did were made available online for the public to scrutinize? It's a really interesting concept, but many companies actually do that. In fact, Moorpark College, as a community college, is fairly good at being open source in our practices. If you go to the website, you can download most of the meeting notes that happen in all of those weird committee meetings all of us teachers have to go to. You can go to the human resources site and see what all of us teachers are paid It's actually quite an interesting concept. It allows the public to scrutinize, to critique, and in response to that, hopefully the company will be more transparent and have more integrity. And so that's one of those concepts that goes way beyond the idea of software or even media. There's a company called Social Signals, which is a social media consultancy firm. They actually do put all of their processes and salaries up for public scrutiny, and they feel that it's made them a better company. It's not perfect for every company, of course. Some companies feel that they have to remain closed or private. And for the idea of stockholders and having publicly traded companies, sometimes that's very necessary. But maybe it doesn't have to be necessary. It's sort of a question that we should ask ourselves as we move into the future. Another thing that can be open source is hardware. If you think about it, many of the things that we use in life were inspired by other physical things. Tables, chairs, you name it. In 1817, there was a very special invention that came onto the scene. It was called a daisine. It was a two-wheeled wooden vehicle that allowed you to push yourself along with your feet and sort of ride like, what, a bicycle, right? And because of the fact that that daisine was not copywritten or patented or closed off from other people, the bicycle was able to flourish into what it is today. Road bikes, mountain bikes, dirt bikes, motorbikes, Vespas, right? I mean, you name it. And so the fact that open source can also be attributed to software is also very interesting. So this actually brings me to my story, which you're going to have to go forward maybe a couple or 3 slides to get to a picture right there. Yeah, that's good. I'm not only a teacher here at Moorpark, but I'm a longtime open source advocate and contributor. What you're seeing on the screen right now are some devices that all run on an operating system called MIMO. That's M-A-E-M-O. And this is a operating system that was originally created by a computer scientist at Nokia. And Nokia created this and brought it to his superiors and said, this is a really great operating system. Check it out. It runs on open source components like Linux, GNOME, Debian, GStreamer, and a lot of other components that were open source, much like the World Wide Web. And because of that, he was able to convince his superiors that he wouldn't be able to develop this operating system like it should be developed on his own or in a proprietary lab with a number of other computer scientists. So they made a bold decision to actually make this operating system open source, make it available to a community of sort of, open source geeks and hackers and things like that, and see what would happen. Well, if you look in the very back, that's a Nokia 770, the silver and black one at the very back of the picture. That was the first device that was released with this operating system back in 2006. This was before the iPhone and long before the iPad and things like that. These were called internet tablets. And these aren't the first handheld devices ever created, right? We also had a company called Palm back in the 90s. They were a proprietary company, but they created the Palm Pilot. And even Apple had something called a Newton, which was a handheld PDA or personal desktop assistant. So these weren't new concepts, yet they were the first devices that were made available that allowed other people to freely and without fear of the law hack the operating system inside. This community developed from a small group of people back in 2006 to over 20,000 people today, okay? And this is something to keep in mind. Nokia didn't just make this available to the public to hack. Out of these 20,000 community members around the world, probably a quarter of those are what they would call engaged or active contributors. That means that there's 5,000 to 10,000 people who are actually working for Nokia for free. Now, why is that? Well, it's fun, but Nokia made another bold decision early on in the arc of their story to do something for the community as well. They created a website where the community could gather. They offered all of the code for free so people could hack and play around with it. And then they started sending out free devices to community members. They started sending us on trips. In fact, if you go to the next slide, this is me speaking in Berlin, a trip I got to go on for free, paid for by Nokia. And the next one, playing around with our devices at a place in Berlin called Seabase, which is actually rumored to have been created by aliens. It's a pretty neat place. Go to the next slide. This is me in Amsterdam, speaking with a couple of Nokia employees about the things that they had done with our open source community. Next slide, please. And this is me playing a live version of Angry Birds. One of the great things that I got to do by being involved in this community is meet all of the developers in Rovio and the creators of Angry Birds, because the Nokia devices were actually the first devices that game was put on. Next slide, please. And this is me in Ireland, in Dublin, at the Avila Stadium, which is quite a large football or soccer stadium. And this is one of the original ways that I got involved with the community. This is actually a group of people that we put together early on called the Community Council, which, as you can imagine, 20,000 people, all wanting a voice with Nokia. It's pretty impossible. So we had an idea to create a small group of 5 people who would be the interface between the company and the community. And so I served 3 terms on the council, and this is us all talking around a table here in Dublin. Go to the next slide, please. And again, me in Dublin. Next slide. All right, so this is how the community, the first summit that we had in Berlin looked. The community is rather small. We're all holding up our geeky little devices and things like that. Move on to Amsterdam. Next picture. The community grew, and even further into Dublin. The community grew even more. And then here's us in San Francisco. If you go to the next slide, there's thousands of people that actually came to this conference. Now, a lot of those people were paid for, were boarded, were fed on Nokia's dime. Why? Because we all contributed in some way to this open source experiment that they had. And they actually figured out that the cost of sending us to these places and the cost of sending us devices was much cheaper, of course, than hiring us as employees, right? And they were benefiting from it in a sort of mutual collaboration. And they were really good about being community members with us as well. And that's a really interesting cultural aspect that you need to think about, is you can't just make your company open source or your product open source. If you do that and you just give it to people, it may fizzle out and fail. People will not be motivated. You have to be part of that culture. You have to be community members with those people. You have to collaborate with those people. You have to get together and be friends with those people. And that's really what happened. I have friends from all over the world now through this community. And if you could go to the next slide. This is the first email that I sent in, when was it? In March of 2007 to the mailing list for MIMO. I had bought my shiny new N800, which was like a really cool internet device that allowed me to do things with my hands, and it was the awesomest thing ever. And I couldn't figure out how to install applications on it. And so I sent an email saying, someone please help me. This email was actually responded to by a guy that said, not, oh, you're so stupid, figure it out. And not, hey, why don't you email me and I'll help you. I got his personal phone number. And he said, call me and I'll walk you through it. And I mean, that's really where this open source philosophy comes to a head, is not only do we interact with these people from all over the world, but we become personal connections. And through that, we develop friendships, we develop things that are bigger than the original software or hardware or business practice. And it becomes something that not only is this weird sort of open, oh, that's open source, but it becomes a philosophy in which me personally, when I think about it, I can't think any other way, because I've developed so many connections and friendships through it that it's just natural. Now, it didn't start with MIMO for me. MIMO was actually probably the 10th open source project that I became involved with in my life. I actually started with the Creative Commons, with WordPress, with movable type, with a Netherlands-based blogging software called Pivot. And I even did some work with Wikimedia, who do Wikipedia. And I didn't do work like, hey, here's some code. I did work like this. I went to their bug site where you can actually contribute bug reports. And I said, I just clicked on this link and it didn't work. Enter. And then all of a sudden you get an email response back from whoever's working on those bugs that says, thanks for this report. What else can you tell us about it? And so that's how it worked. And I didn't donate money, although I have, to various open source projects, because that's how they survive. But I didn't donate money. I didn't donate code. I didn't donate anything but a couple of minutes of my time to say, hey, this thing didn't work. I hope that it helps you. Now, at MIMO, we have over, what do we have? I didn't write it down. Yes, I did. 20,000 bug reports in the system based on all of these people. Over 200 of those are mine. Some could be as simple as something on the website didn't work, or as simple as I tried to download a file from my email and it didn't work, or hey, there's a pixel that's off on a specific piece of artwork. And through some of those contributions I made, I became more and more involved with how the system worked. I became involved with the community council that I talked about. I'm an artist, so I contributed a lot of graphics and things for various applications. And beyond that, I got involved with a lot of people who I've developed applications and games and other things with along the way. And it can just start with an email that says, I have no idea how to do this. And so don't think that open source is some sort of like crazy sort of weird thing that you have to be a geek to get into, or you have to know how to program code. Sometimes it just takes, hey, when I turn my device on, it flashes twice. Should it do that? And someone might say, no, it's not supposed to do that. And then all of a sudden you've made a friend because you're actually helping contribute to the betterment of the system. And that's really where the utopia comes in. But through that, I hope that you can see that the enterprise is exemplified by the fact that businesses can tap the community as long as they're integrated. They can use these transparent open source practices, and they can actually make money from it. People don't make money these days without being on the World Wide Web, right? Which is an open source product. People don't make money by turning on their computer and just hoping that all of that software they bought will create what they need. They need to learn what that software can do and learn how to do it on the software. That comes through learning in schools, tutorials online, other things that are also open source. Going back to the cooking analogy, if you think back, recipes are probably one of the very first open source products. We get our recipes from our family members and our friends. We can change them, we can alter them. No one cares who the original author was, yet we're creating really great food, right? Another instance of that is music. Music was one of the first forms of communication through songs and poetry. Those would never have been passed down if the first person said, sorry, this is mine, I'm going to tell it once and you can't tell it again, right? So that's all open source. And so anyway, I hope you can see that not only is it utopian, but there can be an enterprise formed from it as well.
Okay. So we're asked to wrap up.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap up. Thank you very much, all. We're hoping to very soon create a WordPress website for the year off. And we are planning to create a discussion board and continue conversation. We're really sorry that we didn't give you a chance to ask questions. But feel free, please, to contact both Tim and me if you have any questions by school emails. Or keep alert. We will announce when WordPress website goes up, and then we will have a link to a forum to discuss topics that you were introduced to today.
And by the way, just so you know, both of our offices are here in this hallway outside of the studio here, so you can always come talk to us in person as well.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.